Where's my mark? I need a pizza cake. You good? I am a behind-the-scenes introvert person. I don't like this part of work.
But you're good at it.
Okay. Good evening. Tennessee law permits, but does not require, state execution of some persons convicted of murder. United States constitutional law, through the Sixth Amendment right to counsel, Eighth Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment, and 14th Amendment requirements for due process, restrict and arguably regulate the state's exercise of this extraordinary and terrible power. But sometimes it goes wrong. Historic racial disparities of state killings persist, and sometimes state mistake or misconduct convict and condemn innocent persons to face unjust death. These dealings in death, whether criminal or procedural, take a toll on every person involved. They strain and stain professional, private, and public relationships and damage every community that they touch. They break us. This course is a response to that breach. Welcome to American Baptist College. The course number is SO 326, Strategies for Civic Transformation. I am Phyllis Hildreth, faculty of record for this course, and we welcome you to this public-private community conversation where the learning happens among us, from us, between us, and beyond us. Tonight, November 10th, we have our 5th session in the series Doomed to Repeat, The Legacy of Race in Tennessee's Death Penalty. Tonight, we are addressing the harm, a conversation about restorative justice with Rafiah Muhammad-McCormick, Tennessee Alternatives to the Death Penalty. I should know that by now, y'all. Okay. Community Outreach Coordinator and Mothers Over Murder Board Member, Travis Claybrooks, founder and CEO, and Ashlee Sellars, Director of Restorative Justice Initiatives of Raphah Institute, and organizing addressing issues surrounding youth incarceration and victim trauma using restorative practices. Geographer, scholar, abolitionist, and founder of the California Prison Moratorium Project, Ruth Wilson Gilmore says, "Where life is precious, life is precious." The question before us tonight is it precious enough for us to dare, dream, and design of strategies and solutions that may include abolition, transformation, restoration? Tonight, leading us through these questions, we have Jasmine Woodson of Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, who will lead our discussion and our conversation. Jasmine, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Phyllis. Welcome, everybody, to Session 5 of the Doomed to Repeat series. This series will be addressing the harm, and it's a conversation about restorative justice. My name is Jasmine Woodson, and I am the coordinator for Tennessee Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. And I'm just so excited to introduce you guys to our amazing panel guests. We have first Rafiah Muhammad-McCormick. She is my lovely coworker, and she's also with Mothers Over Murder. And we also have Mr. Travis Claybrooks. He is a pastor, former police officer, and the founder and CEO of Raphah Institute, an organization addressing issues surrounding youth incarceration and victim trauma using restorative practices. We also have Miss Beautiful Ashlee Sellars. She's the director of Director of Restorative Justice Initiatives of Raphah Institute. Thanks everyone for your willingness to be up here. Thanks you guys for coming, and we'll just hop right into it. We're just gonna hop. Unless you guys would you like to say more about what you do?
I think it'll come out, I guess, in the story. So this is kind of different from me since I've been moderating and hosting to be on panel. You know, I got to get my mind into panelist mode. But yeah, I am. My name is Rafiah Muhammad-McCormick. I am the Community Outreach Coordinator for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. I also work with the Nashville Peacemakers as a board member, and Mothers Over Murder as one of the executive members. And you probably like, well, those are very interesting things to put together. And I have not been in these spaces for a long time. I kind of fell into these spaces organically. Was not my, well, I was getting ready to say it wasn't my life mission to get into this work, but I think it almost was. I started my career out in the automotive industry. I was able to work myself up until a project manager, launch manager, and for 25 years, I was, you know, beating the drum and beating let's get these parts out. Let's get these parts out, and you know, having conversations with global manufacturers. Let's hurry and get it done. And on July 9th, 2020, my son, Rodney Armstrong, who is forever 29, was shot in my backyard. And going through that process, I was home at the time when it happened. And I was able to hold him until the ambulance had arrived. But God started working on me at that immediate moment. I was also given the opportunity, and I call it an opportunity because looking back, I think my healing journey would have been different had I not had the opportunity to look in the eyes of the person that had shot and killed my son. I had ran out to the backyard when I heard the gunshots, and you know, seeing him and his friend, or his guest, entangled, had separated them. You know, like, what's going on? They were at a pool party. There was, you know, right before I had laid down, before I came outside, there were girls and guys sitting around the fire pit, hanging out, enjoying themselves, laughing and giggling. And I remember feeling comfortable and laying down, like, oh, they're happy, you know, I'm gonna take me a quick nap. I let them know, hey, I'll make sure y'all go on when I wake up, because I had a lot of work I had to do that night. I was getting ready to go on vacation, so I was taking me a quick nap. And I woke up to the gunshots, and everybody else had fled the backyard. I didn't realize that Rodney was holding the person that had shot him, so that he couldn't flee until I separated them and Rodney had fell to the ground and the young man had retrieved his weapon off the ground. And at that moment, I laid on top of Rodney and thought I was going to be fleeing for my life. And what I saw back was the eyes of my own child, somebody that looked like my son, somebody that looked like, oh shit, I messed up. And I don't remember what the words he said was. All I remember is it ended with ma'am. And after that happened, you know, I didn't really find much purpose in selling automotive parts anymore, or arguing with suppliers on if they was gonna get their stuff to me on time. I knew that one day I was gonna do something, you know, that was related to strategizing and negotiating and problem solving, but I didn't know what it was. I knew I just needed to sit down and sit still. And I don't know if it was because I came from a quality background, that while some people, they'll go to counseling because somebody's encouraging them, or they like, I can't deal, let me go. I approached it more like, let me check, I lost son, check, let's checklist of things that we need to do to deal with this. A, we need to go get a therapist. And so I remember doing it immediately, even it was during COVID, and they were like, well, you can't come in, we only have one therapist that is seeing patients, because, and so, do you want to wait, or do you, want to see that therapist that will see patients in person? Oh, okay, I just lost my son. My son is dead. I need therapy. And so fast forward a year later, while we're navigating the criminal proceedings, while we are angry, hurt, what the hell happened? How did this happen? I thought that violence was not going to touch us. We were in suburbia. We were far removed from the hood where these things are supposed to occur. And initially, it was, and now that I'm getting to know more and more victims, as you're going through those proceedings, initially it's, we're going to get them, they're going to be looking at this much time, and all through it, you are being pulled in this, staying in this anger mode is how I felt. And as we got down about a year into it, they were starting to have some plea agreements. And we had took a plea agreement because I didn't feel like the boy came there to intentionally kill my son. And so when they asked for a plea agreement for voluntary manslaughter from his original second-degree murder charge, we accepted. And we were told that he was going to be looking at 15, 20 years with that. And I was like, okay, well, he'll be this age when he gets out, whatever. And so then they came back and they were like, okay, a couple months, 3 months, 4 months go by. And it's right before the death date, actually. It was in July. And they had told us that they were going to accept a 6-year deal where he could do as low as 1 year, and the max would be 6 years. Because he had no priors, he had no violent offenses prior to that. And when the prosecutor was assuring me that he was trying to convince us that the sentencing would be okay, he used the words of, don't worry, he'll do something to somebody else and serve the rest of his sentence. And that, for me, was the straw that broke the camel's back. I never had heard of restorative justice before then, never knew anything about it. But all of a sudden, I had this vision. And mind you, people would think that I came to this space because I had forgiven the young man. I hadn't yet. Only thing I had to hold on to was I remember he called me ma'am. And so I used that as like, he's redeemable. There's the opportunity here that we could be able to use him to encourage other people not to harm. And so I had this vision that we would, the organizations that I was volunteering with at the time, Mothers Over Murder and Nashville Peacemakers, that he would be able to be mentored by them and then eventually sit in circle with the rest of us mothers to take account, and then go on later on to mentor other young people who may be predisposed to or potentially, get involved with violence. And that was 2021, the end of 2021. So it's been barely 2 years. In fact, I see Sister Jada nodding her head because they were in the courtroom that day. I did not know them. Did not find out they were in the courtroom 2 years, till a year or so later. But that was my introduction. And the crazy thing about it is that I had to convince the prosecutors and the district attorney and the defense attorney to accept this sentencing agreement, because I was asking for something in addition to what they had already agreed upon. And I was putting him in a situation where, he, could have been violated based off of one of my allies saying something negative. But from then on, it became my mission, just that we have got to approach this differently. We've got to do something differently. So that's why I'm here in this space. I moved into Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty because I felt like if we executing people, we're telling children that violence is the answer. That if somebody harms you or hurts you, that violence is the answer. That vindication is the answer. That retribution is the answer. And so that became my mission, to abolish the death penalty and take a different approach.
Such a beautiful, heartfelt story, Rafiah, and we're sorry for your loss, and you're doing a great job out here. I'm glad that I get to work alongside you and see all the awesome things that you're doing, so thank you for sharing, Rafiah. Miss Ashlee?
Thanks, sis. I'm glad to be in this space. I'm thankful for everyone here. So for context for this particular panel, I grew up with a ton of trauma, unlike a lot of people in our neighborhoods who actually cause harm. What happened for me was that I began leaving home, kind of looking for an escape, really keeping one foot in front of the other, more in survival mode than I was anything else, and ended up staying with a gentleman that I was going to school with. This particular night, he asked me to drive him somewhere. I drove him somewhere, was parked in the car. He got out of my car, was gone for a particular amount of time, got back in the car sometime later, and I turned to him and I said, "Did I hear a gunshot?" And he said, "Yes." And he had a purse and a money bag. And over the years, I've continued to process that particular night. And my truth is that in that moment, I didn't say like, "Oh my God, somebody is hurt." I said, "Oh my God, like I'm gonna have to go back to my house." I wasn't able to process what it meant to be in community. I wasn't able to process what it meant for other people. I wasn't able to process what accountability looked like or what remorse looked like or any of that stuff, really putting one foot in front of the other and just moving in that survival space. I never gave a statement to anyone. The lady who died, her name was Cynthia. She died on December the 2nd, 1995. December the 8th, we were arrested, and I was a juvenile. I was a kid at the time. And again, I didn't give a statement. I got locked in solitary confinement because they didn't know what to do with me with my charge. Eventually got transferred into the adult system, again, put in solitary confinement. And they, again, didn't know what to do with me, and so they weren't even familiar, I think, with the rights that I was allowed to have. I wasn't always given an hour out. I wasn't always fed. I wasn't always given the opportunity to bathe. I wasn't always given the opportunity to use the phone. I didn't know that I could go to the library. I didn't know that I had opportunities to go to the law library. I didn't know like any of these rights that I've learned over the years that should have been afforded to me. And in truth, I don't think that they knew that either. I think the officers that were working in that particular space, while I think they should have known the rights that should have been afforded to me, I don't think they did. I don't think they were properly trained to be in that space. I had continued to say, like, I want to go to trial, I want to go to trial, I want to go to trial. I had public defenders, and I think they came to see me literally a handful of times and told me, like, you're going to be able to go to trial. I was supposed to go to trial on a Monday, and on Thursday they came to me and said, there's another case that takes priority, and so you're going to be postponed. Fine. Then my mother came to the court, to the jail later that night and said, they said that you need to take this plea for 25 years. And I said, I'm not taking a plea. I didn't do anything. You know, I'm a kid. If they keep me for 25 years, they can just keep me. If that's where I grow up, that's all I'm going to know. That's where they need to leave me. I'm not going to be able to survive out here. And was really the space that I had leaned into. My mom and I don't have a good relationship, but as many people, if you're honest with yourselves, you might know that you still lean into protecting those closest to you, even in the midst of all of that trauma. And we really do develop those trauma responses of how am I protective to other people, and what do I hold dear, and how am I supposed to show up? And that moves with us in our life, whether we recognize that that's healthy or not. And that's the space that I was in. And so the next morning, they called me up to the courtroom to take a plea. And I think I actually said to my attorney, like, you're really arrogant for calling me up here. Like, I had already said this isn't what I wanted, and still you call me into this space. And there was a man and a woman that stood up, and they started giving a statement. And no one had ever talked to me about a victim impact statement. No one had ever said, like, hey, there's going to be someone else in the courtroom that's going to say something. There was no preparation for this particular moment. And what I learned in that statement was that it was Cynthia's mother and father. And immediately they started talking about what a horrible human being I was, how I had never taken any accountability, and I had never shown any remorse. And this is the first time they had seen me in person. And so I raised my hand and said, excuse me, like, I'd like to talk to you. And of course the courtroom erupted and said that I was out of order and that wasn't something I was allowed to do. And the family actually said, no, I would like to have a conversation with her. And so they allowed the mother and the father of a woman who was murdered, and myself only, to go behind closed doors in judges' chambers. And in that moment, I didn't say, like, hey, here's all my trauma, here's what happened this night, here is, right, whatever my narrative was. What I said to them was, your daughter's death saved my life. And they immediately grabbed me, they hugged me, they cried with me, they prayed with me, they loved on me. And so I come into this work and I come into this conversation in a space of, I had spent almost 3 years in solitary confinement. I had spent 3 years almost in this space of being neglected showers and not being fed and being mistreated and whatever thing that you can come up with. And it had not produced 1 ounce of healing for them. When they came into that space, what they said was not, you haven't been punished enough. What they said was, you have not taken any accountability. You have not shown any remorse. And so therefore, they thought I was a monster. And in that moment, I think they were allowed to see me in a human perspective. And I think that's what we want. So I hear Rafiah saying too, like, I hung on to ma'am. I wanted to believe that they could be redeemable. I wanted to believe that they could be saved. I wanted to believe that they could be an upstanding member of society. I could believe that this was a moment that they didn't want to happen. And I think if our system created opportunities for these conversations to happen, for a different narrative to be pushed, then people who are victimized repetitively, from a person who has caused harm to the system that continues to perpetuate harm, right? This is an ongoing thing that goes way beyond just the person in the moment that it happens. And so if we created different opportunities for people to say, this is actually what I want, right? And that's not mandatory. That's just an option. That is a power given back to say, Rafiah, in this moment, what do you want, right? Or to Cynthia's parents, what do you want? So for them to have the amount of healing that I believe that they had, even in a 30-second conversation, like, what more would healing look like for our communities or for people who are harmed if we have practices, if we have people to come in and surround and offer the support that they need in these moments?
Oh my goodness, that was a beautiful story as well. And I'm over here trying to fight back tears from the both of you guys.
It happens every single time. Every single time she tells her story, I cry. And that's why I was like, I'm gonna have to go first this time, because last time I went after her and I was like, took me a minute. But the reason why it makes me cry is because, like I said, it's only been a year or so since the young man was sentenced in my son's death. I don't know what his 30-year-old self is gonna look like, or his 40-year-old self is gonna look like, or his 50-year-old self. If you are to ask me, I would tell you that I want him to solve world hunger. I want him to do space travel, figure out where we can live on Mars. But when I'm in space with individuals who are justice impacted, they give me life because I can see what he is going to become. So that's why I'll be attached to you.
Okay. You can't make me cry when you introduce yourself now, because I don't have much left in me.
I will disappoint you. Good evening. My name is Travis Claybrooks, founder and CEO at Raphah Institute. How did I get engaged with restorative justice? Part of my background is in law enforcement. I was a police officer here in Nashville. in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it did not take very long for me as a police officer to see and recognize that arresting and prosecuting and incarcerating and surveilling and, for some, killing people was not going to make us any safer. It was not addressing the drivers of violence, the drivers of harm, the drivers of so-called criminal activity. What I came to recognize very quickly was that I rarely met a so-called criminal. I met people who were trying to survive the hell that they were living in. And they were doing the best that they could with what they had. And that is not an excuse for choices that anyone made, but it does begin to explain how and why people wake up one day and murder someone, or rob someone, or pistol whip someone, or steal, or sell drugs, or sell their body. I saw women selling their bodies so that they could feed so that they could get their health care from a pipe. And there were pharmaceutical salesmen in the neighborhood who would sell them their health care. But that's how they were dealing with their experience. That's how they were processing their existence. And so that was the system that I was a part of. And I could see that system was not working, that did not work. At that time, I did not know what the answer was. I didn't have a sense of what was supposed to happen or what should be happening other than what was already happening. Which was, my work and going to court and, partnering with the DA to prosecute people and so forth. Fast forward about 15 years to 2015, I was pastoring at the time in a traditional church context. And I remember thinking back to my time as a police officer, and I remember saying to myself, man, if people just had the resources that they needed to thrive and survive, they would. They probably would. And I remember it was the week of July 4th of 2016. Philando Castile was murdered. Alton Sterling was murdered the very next day. By Friday, Dallas was rioting. 4 police officers would be killed there. And I remember saying to myself, asking myself, why is it that black people are always in the presence of police to get killed in the first place? And instant as the thought formed in my mind raced back to myself as a police officer. I spent most of my time in the Napier-Sudicum community. For those of you who are here from Nashville and you know this city, I spent most of my time there, and we over-policed that neighborhood. Policing was the answer to everything. It was answer to healthcare crises, mental health breakdowns. It was the answer to social issues. It was the answer for everything to arrest someone. And I remembered, man, Black people living in this country, especially in an urban context, are living out the consequences of a slave South, and the economic consequences of that, the healthcare consequences of that, the housing consequences of that, and policing is our answer to that, and that's why we're always in the presence of the police to get shot in the first place. And I said to myself, man, we need to turn that thing up on its head. We gotta fix that. And this is the pastor, Travis, that is saying this. And I looked around me at the church that I was pastoring, and I said, they ain't gonna do it. That ain't happening. And so I had 2 frustrations happening for me, converging at that moment. A system that wasn't working, and another system that wasn't working. A system of prosecution and incarceration that was not working, and another system that probably was better equipped or most equipped than anyone in a community to respond to the core drivers of violence and crime. And it wasn't working either. And so I set out to try to do something different. And again, I still didn't have language for everything, and I didn't know what it was. But I was working with what I had, and so I went to the juvenile court judge, Sheila Calloway, and I said, I want to plant a church in around the court, and I want to do something. I just want to engage with parents of kids who are in detention, and I want to create a faith community that is focused on those people and supporting them. And Sheila said, fine. So every Saturday we would set up food in one of the rooms in the courthouse, and as parents were coming out from visiting their young people in detention, they would stop in here and they would get food, and they would find community, and they would find people who were loving on them and were caring about them and allowing them to process. These were mostly parents of kids who were facing transfer to the adult system. So they were going to be in juvenile detention for a while. And so they would come in week after week and they would cry, and we would answer questions about the legal process and provide support for them. And we got so deep with families, we found other needs that they would have, and we found ourselves repairing somebody's plumbing one time, and all sorts of things. And it then emerged to me, we have got to figure out a way to keep these kids out of this place in the first place. And I didn't know what that really looked like. And I asked Judge Calloway, are you familiar with like restorative justice? And she said, yes, I'm familiar, and so forth. And I had my first contact with restorative justice happened way back in the early 2000s when I lived in Colorado. And by the way, I just want to say for the record, restorative justice practices have been around for centuries, for millennia, in indigenous people groups around the world, First People groups around the world. So it is not anything new. It is not anything that we have discovered here in the West. We are borrowing this frame from people who've been practicing it in addressing harm and conflict for centuries. And so we express gratitude to them. And so I was doing some civic work with some Native American folks in Colorado, and that's how I came into contact with restorative justice. So long story short, I ended up starting a nonprofit. We ended up approaching the court to say, hey, we can do restorative justice work. And that's how we got into restorative justice work in the juvenile legal system. We've been at it for about 6 years now. We have worked, we've completed over 60 cases from start to finish. We've worked with almost 200 cases coming through juvenile court. We have less than a 5% recidivism. That is, less than 5% of the young people that complete our program go on to get convicted of a new charge. And so, in the words of our good friend Danielle Sarad, who we respect up in New York, if incarceration made us safer, we'd be the safest nation in human history. We know more, we have more data on our current criminal legal process, and we know that it does not work for people who've caused harm or people who have been harmed. And so what we need is options, and I think restorative justice gives us options and opportunities to pursue something different that actually addresses the needs of people who have been harmed and the needs of people who have caused harm.
Thank you. That's an amazing story. Thank you for being the solution where you saw a problem. And thank you to everyone up here on the panel. Beautiful stories from everybody. I have a few questions I'm going to ask you, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So my first question, you guys can answer. We'll start with Rafiah and go down. But with the tough on crime rhetoric of today, how do we talk about restorative justice in a way that doesn't seem soft on crime?
You know, a lot of people, and that's why I wanted to clear up that when I said I had this vision of restorative justice, people thought I was in a forgiving space. You know, that I had, wanted to, just felt so loving towards this child and wanted to save him. I wasn't in that space yet. And I think that the myth is that restorative practices are in lieu of any type of accountability. And that does not have to happen. I mean, there are cases where we can use only restorative sentencing, but I think that it can be used at any time. The main thing is that the only reason that victims, and this is just my opinion, but I feel as a victim, and I'm not going to speak for all victims, we've only been given tough on crime. That's all we've been given. Your justice equals this max that we can get. That is what has been ingrained in us. We're not supported with many services from the state. Victims' compensation, which is one of the only state resources they have, most of us are denied disproportionately in people, in these marginalized communities are denied. And so what victims want, is like we talked about, is that we just want to be whole. Your accountability is not going to come in the form of your body being in prison. The young man that unalived my son can't give me my child back no matter how many years he spends in prison. But if he has the ability to save lives, if he can save hundreds of lives and we give him the equipment and the resources to be able to do that, then that in some way feels like my son is not in vain. My loss is not in vain.
Yeah, I think we have to work around a couple of different definitions. When we hear so the definition that I feel like I have been told throughout my life is that it's about rehabilitation. And if the criminal legal system is about rehabilitation, we're definitely failing. If the criminal legal system is about punishment, we're doing a really good job. But that does not address the needs of people who are harmed. And that doesn't create a positive, transformative space for people who are going to come back into our community. And so I think we have to break down what we mean by soft on crime and what we actually want to accomplish in a system. And if our system is that first and foremost, we want to have a community that is safe, if that's the immediate need of we have to incarcerate this person or we have to put them somewhere so that we have safety, that isn't working either. What creates more safety is actually having conversations around accountability. And I would argue that restorative practice work has much more accountability than anything that the criminal legal system accounts for. That actually does the opposite. It says, keep your mouth shut or this is going to be used against you, right? I'm going to be able to create more time for you to receive punishment if you say something. And so it's advantageous for people to sit down and be still and not process their thoughts or not be in a space of wanting to have accountability or being able to process that accountability. In a community, we don't teach each other how to be accountable, right? We say, go say you're sorry, and that's it. We don't really teach that. And the criminal legal system does more of the unteaching. It bakes in violence. It bakes in not being able to meet one's economic needs. It bakes in shame and isolation and all of these things that actually make us less likely to succeed in society or be productive members. So I would start with, let us define what we're really saying when we say something is tough on crime or something is easy on crime.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump right on that bandwagon. Our current criminal legal system is not tough on crime. It is soft on crime. It's tough on so-called criminals, so-called, but it's not tough on crime. It doesn't address crime. It's by design to not truth tell. The structure is designed to not allow truth to emerge, to come forward. There is an antagonism in the system that's built in that's designed to suppress truth or to manipulate facts, to win or lose a case. That's what we're talking about in the criminal legal system. It is about winning and losing cases at best. In reality, what happens most, it is about using charges in a bargaining system where people are, where their charge is leveraged against them to say something or to plead to something that may not even be true. That's what the system mostly is. It's car salesmen. Leveraging time with a charge in order for you to say something that may or may not be true. So we're not even addressing crime at all. We're not addressing the harm that's happened. We're not addressing the impact of the harm. We're not addressing the aftermath of the harm. We're not addressing the consequences of it for either party. We're not addressing the drivers of it. What has caused this person, nobody, who just wakes up one day and say, you know what, I got a good idea. I think I'm gonna go kill somebody today. That's not normal. That just doesn't happen. Something has precipitated that. And this is where, in our framework at Raphah Institute, where restorative justice intersects with transformative justice. We look at restorative justice as opportunities of a moment, that is the commission of a crime, the commission of a harm, the causing of a harm. There's a moment that then allows us to get a vista into a season, into a trajectory. What is the environment? What is the ecosystem in which this moment emerged? And let us address that ecosystem. Let us address the factors that have allowed this moment to emerge. And that becomes the transformative work. How do we transform the neighborhood? How do we transform the mental health situation? How do we transform the housing circumstance that has driven, and as Ashlee said, these very same things, the isolation, the poverty, the shame, the violence itself, these are things that we then turn around and bake into the place that we are incarcerating people. And over 70% of the people who are in the place are going to come out of the place. And that is what they've experienced for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. What are we expecting to change? And so soft on crime, restorative justice, seriously? That is the pot calling the kettle black. Our criminal legal system is soft on crime. Restorative justice is far more rigorous on the activity that has taken place and the consequences of that activity by engaging the individual. So tough on so-called criminals, I call them survivors. Tough on them, yeah, for sure, in the form of punishment, but very, very soft on crime.
Thank you all for that. But the next 3 questions that I asked, you guys can answer when you see fit. So the next question is, how does this process promote actual accountability to harm?
Sure. So let's
Preach.
let's frame the concept of accountability. There is a current concept of accountability that suggests that we can hold people accountable. And that is a fallacy. We cannot hold people accountable. The ability to account for harm is something that must be learned. The human mental framework tends not to account for harm. This goes all the way back to the cookie and the cookie jar. You know, children, no, it wasn't me, I didn't do it, no, it wasn't me, right, no. We are kind of just hardwired to not account, right? It takes practice, it takes learning, it takes teaching to learn to account. And most people who cause harm, whether that is criminal harm or not, really need a process whereby they are able to learn to do that, to account for it. And what does it mean to actually account for the harm? I mean, I love peering into the world of financial accounting to ask the questions, what does an accountant do? An accountant names all the pennies. What came in? What happened to it when it came in? Where did it come from? Where did that penny come from? What happened to it when it got here? Where is it going? How many of them went? If your accountant came to you in your business and said, we're going to round your books to the nearest $1,000, you would look at your accountant and say, you need a new job, right? But that is what we do in our criminal legal system. We round harm to the nearest TCA code. We never ask about the pennies of the harm. Where did it come from? Rafiah, talk about all the things that you felt in losing your son. Like, let's name it all. Let's take days and days and days for you to name all the pennies and where they came from and where they're going and what's happening to them, all the dimes, all the nickels, all the quarters. What did you need? What were all of the things? And what restorative justice does as a process when it's working at its best, it gives us a process for doing just that, for naming the pennies of the harm and its impact. It invites the person who has caused the harm to participate in the very same process. And as we know, hurt people hurt people. It invites people who have caused harm to begin to name all the ways in which they have been harmed and it's never been accounted for. They get an opportunity to speak to that because so often these are the drivers. This is how they got to that moment. They had endured a bunch of harm that had gone unaccounted for, and they find themselves, that harm now has passed through them to someone else. And so restorative justice gives us chances to name those things, to call out those things, and then to say, okay, how are we going to account for this? How can we make this right to the greatest extent possible? No, your son not be brought back. No, Cynthia cannot be brought back. But what can we do to make this right to the greatest extent possible? And that's not a quick process. That's a lengthy process. It takes time. But hey, if you go through the criminal legal process, it's going to be 3 years before you go to trial anyway. So we might as well spend it doing restorative justice. How about that?
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody else want to add anything to that? Okay. Well, I think this question would be really good for both of you guys. But how do we approach this when talking to victims after a crime has occurred and there is harm? How do we approach that conversation with them?
And they're the experts on this. My space is, being a victim that is moved to restorative practices, and that made me feel like the accountability was there. But I'm very protective of victims. I feel like it's necessary that we allow them to be in that space to be ready for those types of conversations. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I would say that first and foremost, it's having that immediate response, and I don't think we have that specifically around like the Black and brown community. There aren't victim advocates that come out immediately and say what has happened in this moment is wrong, and we need to see what you need. Right? They don't talk about victim compensation. They don't talk about how to get property. They don't talk about who can show up at the hospital or when you can leave a scene. They don't talk about any of the things that need to happen immediately, and so I think first and foremost, just showing up as community and saying what just happened wasn't okay and we're here with you and we're going to stand with you and these are the things that you might need to know, and we need to figure out who to delegate those to if you're not in the space to be able to do that, or how you want people to show up, right? And then I think it's continuing to sit with people time and time again as they go through stuff. I think people expect for us to say that people can't be angry, and that's not where we sit. You can cuss as long as you need to cuss, and you can pound the wall, and you can do all the things, and all the emotions are perfect. They're exactly where they need to be. And so sometimes it isn't what we need to say, it's what we need to do or what we need to hear. Sometimes it is showing up and just sitting back and saying, what do you need to say? What do you need to say? And you tell me how I need to show up, right? And I think another thing that's been misconstrued is that this is a space of opportunity. This is not a mandate. This is not coming to someone who has experienced this tremendous harm and saying, you know what, we're not going to allow that to go to court. We're going to pull it on over here. This is saying, what do you need? How can this be customizable for you? Do you want to go through the criminal legal system as it is? If so, if you want us to show up with you, we'll show up with you. And you'll have people sit with you, and you'll have people go through this process, and you'll have people cry with you, and cuss with you, and laugh with you, and do all the things. But if you want something else, we're here for that too. And you're the one that's had the power stripped, and you're the one that gets to make the decision which path you want to take. And I think it's really, what is the word that I want to put in there? I think it's a disservice to our humanity for us to make the decision on which path someone can choose. And so for us just to say, this happened to you. This did not happen to the state. This happened to you. And which path is it that you would like to choose? And just giving the opportunity is probably the best response that I can think of.
I would say that because that was the main thing, is that victims don't feel like they have control in the current system. And the person is taking account to the state, not to me. It's not set up, like she said, when she said she wanted to speak to the family, that wasn't allowed. It's not allowed for you to, they're not promoting conversations. Even once you are been sentenced, those conversations are not promoted. And so I would say, I have 10 children. I didn't birth all 10, but I have 10 children between me and my husband. And I'm one of 5. We had a lot of family that was touched. And not all that family was in a space of not touching, if you get what I'm saying. I think as whether you're the person that's harmed or the person that has done the harm, we have to recognize that not only am I not a lone figure, I'm connected community, I'm connected to family. The person that has done the harm is also connected to all those different individuals. And how we approach that person that has done harm, if we approach it that we're going to treat this individual like a pawn, a moving piece that we used as a win or lose, then how is he incarcerated with other people that he's talking to? Is he promoting a healthy environment, or is he also just thinking about still survival? When he comes out, is he still just thinking about survival? The family that's on the outside, that's hearing from their loved one that's jailed on the inside, that's in this space of continual anger and survival, how are they looking at the system? Nothing here is promoting health. And so I think that as a society, we have got to understand that we are all connected. When I came into this space, we've talked about, those of you who have been with us a few weeks, we've talked about the hierarchy of harm and where a person's determination of the impact of their death is based off of how innocent we perceive them to be. I would say John Benet Ramsey is at the top, and we're going to put George Floyd at the bottom, just to give you kind of idea. What then happens is that if we are only reacting and surrounding the individuals that are at the top level, and we are ignoring everybody else, the people that's touched on the harm side, the people that's touched on the people that's being harmed side, and all those community, and we've already said, really, you're not that valuable. We're not that outraged. We're not all jumping and running, oh my God, who is this person that did what they did? They're so horrible. What is going to happen to them? We're not doing that every single day. That is not a statement that is being made daily, even if you hear about a shooting every single day. It's not. So if we don't approach this that we're all connected, that this is not something that happens to some isolated group of individuals, and maybe if they weren't doing this, then they would be still here, then that, that will promote us finally ending the violence.
Okay, I have one more question I'm going to ask you guys before I turn it over to the audience. But how do we, with this current system that we have right now, how do we get restorative justice into that? And what would that look like, introducing restorative justice into the current system right now?
Travis and I may tag team this one a little bit. I think there's a couple of spaces. I think for people who are currently causing harm, or have caused harm in the present moment, who haven't gone through the court system yet, I think that's offering people who are harmed the opportunity to make the decision on which path they want to go through, and going ahead and starting there. I think for people who are incarcerated, I think it's expanding the opportunity around parole and clemency. I think it's also saying for people who have been a part of the system for a while, like, maybe this is something that you want, and let us figure out what that looks like, right? If we're talking about the death penalty, like, I have never heard of anyone in that space who wasn't still really angry and really mournful and not in a space of needing, like, deep healing. I don't know that I've ever heard of anyone coming into that space and saying, I have completely healed, other than the people that have gone into the space and said, I don't want the person to die, but the state is already making the decision to do that anyway, right? And so creating some type of process for people who are in the system, for people who have been harmed, to say, would you want to have a conversation? Would you want to have some restorative action? Is what has happened with the state what you would want? And just pausing for a moment and listening to all of the people and seeing what's really happening and rethinking what we continue to do. Again, like, we know what we are currently doing does not work. And yet we keep pushing for more of the same stuff. And that hurts everybody. Our community is missing out on a lot by all of the people who are incarcerated, who aren't being able to use their true gifts and their intelligence and their heart to make a positive transformation for all of us.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, maybe a higher level piece, because there are the mechanics of, how do you introduce it into a criminal legal process, whether it's at the pre-prosecution space or the post-adjudication space or in a parole space or in a death penalty kind of space. I think there are points, as Ashlee's pointed out, there are points where restorative justice practices can be appropriate at every one of those spaces. But I really think we have to make it happen, really, ubiquitously, we really have a public relations problem. It's a marketing question. Because currently, what our market says, and Rafiah mentioned it earlier, our system has defined what we should expect justice to look like. It has told us that justice should look like prosecution and incarceration and death. That's what it should look like. We have to figure out ways as a community to change that narrative, to allow justice to be reborn, to allow justice to actually heal to a space where it is no longer conceived of as mere punishment, that that's what justice equals. That we invite people to reimagine what justice and justice processes can look like. And then we must figure out a way how to make it politically untenable for you to run for office unless you get down with that. We have to make it politically untenable for you to win office if you're a DA, if you're a judge, if you're a sheriff, if you're a police chief, a mayor, if you are in that, if you're going to be a parole commissioner. It has to become politically untenable for you to reject frames of restorative justice processes. I would say that just here in Davidson County, we have made progress in that way. In our last race for DA, all three of the candidates had some form of restorative justice on their platform. First time in history here. Because we've been able to demonstrate and show that restorative justice practices can work. And so now we're hoping to expand into adult court. We're working with Judge Babb on that frame. We're launching Jada X is here from Shelby County, Memphis. We just signed an MOU with the juvenile court judge and new district attorney there to launch a restorative justice process in juvenile court there. So once again, I think we have to, there's the nuts and bolts of doing it at various points in the system, but we have to make it politically favorable or politically untenable for people to even run for office unless they are down with restorative justice practices. The community must feel that this is a viable, durable, rigorous process where people account for harm that they cause. We're not talking about slap on the wrist, and that it's meaningful for people who have been harmed. And that's just marketing. That's marketing PR. I know it may seem strange to hear or say, but that's really what it is. It's having community conversations. It's conversations like this. This is a marketing exercise that helps to change the narrative about what's working, what doesn't work, and what options and opportunities that we can actually afford ourselves as a community.
Thank you, all of you guys. Amazing answers to these questions. So now I'm going to open this up to the audience, and if anybody has a question, would you let me know? We'll run a mic to you. Okay. I'll just meet you right here.
All right, let me do what he said and speak into the mic. So I have a question, and it's about something real. There is a case in Cookeville, right, where restorative justice, I believe, could really be implemented there. It's a situation where a young man shot and killed his friend. It was an accident. It was an unfortunate accident. I'm sure the worst day of his life. When things like that happen, right, how does the community ask for help in that space?
Yeah, I think that's an opportunity. You know, our dream, we've talked about it for a few years now. Our dream would be to have a, you call 911. Well, what if we had 711? That was the restorative justice 911. You didn't want to go through the regular system process, and you could call a number, and you could self-refer, right? I don't really know the politics in Cookeville, but I think it's first and foremost engaging the people who have been harmed. It has to start there. I think all authentic versions of restorative justice practices must begin with the person who's been harmed. Their voice must be elevated, and they must drive this and be supported in driving it. And if they are able to do that, being able to have the appropriate conversations at the appropriate place and appropriate time, be it with the district attorney, be it with the defense counsel or the person who's accused, be it with other community members or community activists, community movers, to begin to engage the conversation. I think those are some ways and some strategies to approach that. But I would just hammer and sort of stomp on the floor, if this were going to be on the test, that it must begin with the person who has been harmed. We say all the time that when a criminal harm happens, two crimes always happen. A robbery always accompanies every crime. That is to say, if I am harmed by a crime, regardless of what that TCA crime is, I have been robbed of my agency. I have been robbed of my power and my control. I did not ask you to steal my car today. I didn't ask you to kill my son. I didn't ask you to break into my house. You robbed me of my power. You robbed me of my control. And so one of the first things that must happen in response to that is that that power must be restored in the form of me being able to say what I want to see happen next. And so as restorative justice practitioners, we engage deeply first with the person who has been harmed. What do you need and what do you want to see happen? So I would start there, regardless of how and the conversations need to go, start with the person who's been harmed.
Yeah, and just adding a little bit into that, again, I think there are a lot of people in our communities that don't know about restorative practice work or know how that would transform. In other areas, there's going to have to be a push. There's going to have to be some education pushed in that way. I would say in Davidson County, we've received referrals in different ways. We've had pastors call us and say, I am sitting with the family of a loved one who has had someone murdered, and they don't want to go through the criminal legal system, and what do we do? And so then us being able to contact the proper people that would give us the authority to be able to lean into that space. We've had attorneys say, this process isn't right for my client, and I think justice would actually be served better in the restorative justice venue, and being able to have those conversations for that to come over. We've had district attorneys and ADAs say, I believe this needs to be shifted to a different area. So I think first and foremost, there's probably a lot of education that needs to happen in all of our communities. I would also push us to move outside of our comfort level, because we have all been taught that the only thing that can happen in the aftermath of crime or harm is for us to punish, for us to incarcerate, for community service, for restitution, right? And that's the menu, and that's all you have to choose from. And so I think we have to push ourselves beyond that to say, let's pause for a moment and see, like, what are the real needs of our community, right? Will incarceration solve this thing for our community? And if not, then we need to demand something different. Going back to our political officials, we need to be able to stand in that gap and say, we want something other than the only thing that you have been giving us for centuries that we know doesn't work.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You can have the Smarties. Go sit down.
So I was a little nervous to get up here because this conversation is a little sensitive to me. This conversation is directly to you all that work with juveniles. So last year, my 10-year-old nephew was killed by his brother on accident. His brother was playing with a gun, killed him. The problem is that his dad was charged. And so my nephew, who is now 14 years old, it's a very traumatic, thing to see your brother fall, and the last thing you hear him say is, Brandon, I love you. And so there's just so many things for me as his aunt that I'm just like, he needs some help, right? Some help prior that he wasn't able to get from my sister due to a lack of being educated. But now he's not able to get the help he needs because his dad was charged, right? So he was presented to the court and had to get restorative. People were coming to him, talking to him, and getting him the help he needs. He was just a father who wanted to see his kids. My sister kept him away, and this was the first time that he got his kids. He was called into work, he did security, so he was like, it would only be 3 hours. Well, an hour after he left, my nephew got killed. And so, thank you. And so what happens if the juvenile is never presented in court, but clearly needs some help?
Call us. We'll see you after this.
Any more questions?
Just a point of clarification. So if a crime happens here in Davidson County and the person that's harmed goes to the district attorney's office and says, I want this process instead of the normal process, will our district attorney facilitate that?
So I would say right now that our district attorney is open to hearing those conversations. I couldn't give you 100% that every person that went and said this is what I want would be sent over. I think having conversations with us, having conversations with them, so that we can have some of those tough conversations together, right? I think there's a lot of space around community safety that people who are in politics have to negotiate, or feel that they have to negotiate. I think that also speaks to us continuing to change the narrative. If I was in a place of power to say, I'm going to say that you can do this thing as a person who's harmed, and I receive pushback from the community about that, I think it would be a really appropriate response, and I would hope that my community would receive that if I said, the person who was harmed asked for this. The person who was harmed, who had their power taken, said this is what they wanted, and I'm doing the wishes of the person who was harmed. And so I think it's us also laying aside as a community what our expectations are in the aftermath of harm, and being able to lean in and support people who may ask for restorative practice work. So, you want to add some more? So yeah, I think our current district attorney is very open. They have signed on our memorandum of understanding in order to be able to do this work and continue to have conversations with us.
And I would say press for it. I would say press for it. Press for it. If you're a person who's been harmed and you want to go through a restorative justice process, or you want to, at the very least, you want to know more about it, ask for that. Demand it. Demand it. And it should happen. Our goal in Davidson County is to have every case that comes through juvenile or adult court. I know we got to go. We got to go, don't we? We okay? To have every case that comes through both juvenile and adult court have the option for a restorative justice process. That is our goal. There's our goal.
Any more questions?
How you doing? How y'all doing today? So my question is, what are some what are some preventative measures that we could take to where we don't even have to get to the restorative practice approach?
I'll say first and foremost, we probably need to start addressing white supremacy and disrupting the systems that have created environments and structures that create a space where people don't have what they need to thrive. So I think that's first and foremost. I think it's reopening the space to be able to have these conversations about that. I think it's trying to get help as soon as possible. I know that therapy can sometimes be a touchy subject. And yet I think there are, the Black Mental Health Alliance, I think their Black Mental Health Village now does a lot of work in the community to make sure that culturally appropriate therapy options are being offered too. I think that's something that we have to lean into. I also think we have to be purposeful about the way that we shift language, right? And so I heard my sister right here talking about her nephew, and the terminology that she used was juvenile, right? So in our world now, juvenile has become a kind of a code word for delinquent, right? That's your nephew. It's a child, it's a kid, it's a young person, right? And the way that the media has pushed forward some of this stuff, these words, this language, I think continues to give us permissions to treat people a particular way. Instead of demanding, like, no, my nephew, his father, right? My brother, right? Like whatever the language is and whatever people are to us, I think that it's really important that we demand that and we push that. And I think that shifts the space also of us having more humanity with each other. I think we have to be present in our communities, right? I think there's a lot of place now, even hearing like people will be like, no, that kid's bad. No, they're not. There's no way that 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old is bad. They need you to stand up with them. They need you to say, hey, listen, like that's not what you need to be doing, or this is what we're gonna do differently. And I think sometimes we shy away from that space of like what's okay for us to step into. My kid's in the back, like for all the people in the back row to continue to parent him, thank you. Right? For all the people that said, don't walk under the mic. Like that's appropriate. That's what I want. I want to be in a place where if my young person is stepping out, then I got a whole village right here that's saying, come here, young boy, let me like give you some direction. right? And so I think it's a lot of that.
I'll add to that. There are 5 things that we try to focus on, and I think that if you're a part of a faith community, for example, or wherever your village is, there are 5 things that we think, if we can address these things adequately, and we try to do this as a part of our restorative justice process. So we refer to our restorative justice work as printervention work. It is both prevention and intervention. It's an interventive thing at a moment, but it also prevents new things. That's why we've got less than 5% of new stuff from the young people who complete. We have to ensure that people have adequate housing, safe and stable neighborhoods. How many days this year did this young person go without basic utilities, for example? How many times did they have to relocate unintentionally? These kinds of things. We need high quality access to education from prenatal through college. We have to ensure that our young people are getting the education that they need in early childhood, kindergarten, through elementary, through high school. We need to address the issue of healthcare and access and engagement with it. That's mental health, that's physical health, that's nutrition. The nearest grocery store to the Napier-Sutica community is Kroger on 8th Avenue. That's ridiculous. That is food, that is nutritional apartheid. That young person's not going to show up, the adult is not going to show up malnourished. These are precipitators of violence. So we talked about people need access. A fourth thing, people need access to economic security. They have to be able to meet their basic economic needs. We have to ensure that as communities that happens. And finally, we think when people have adequate social support systems, that these things prevent. That is, if I get into a bad way, I got somebody I can call. If I get into a little bit of trouble, or if I need somebody to take me somewhere, I need somebody to watch the kids for a few hours, I got somebody I can call. I got a community that I can turn to. Somebody's gonna touch my child, right? Somebody's gonna help me. So these 5 areas, we call it the she-he. Social support, housing, economics, healthcare, and housing. We need those things. If we can address those things, if we can increase the access that people have to those 5 basic things, we think that we will greatly reduce the incidence of violence and crime throughout the entire city. There may be a Nobel Prize waiting on someone who can figure out how to do all of that, but I think that is the work before us. By the way, I want to say we are working to build a cradle to home ownership pipeline to replace our cradle to prison pipeline centered in these 5 areas. How do we help a young person or an individual get from wherever they are to begin to have the experiences associated with home ownership versus having the experiences associated with going to prison, right? As preventative work in this space. Very good question.
I want to restate something too. I want to make sure that, so I think I use restorative practice work with my child. I use restorative practice work in all my relationships. So when we think about restorative practice work, it isn't just with regard to like the criminal legal system. And so I think there are 2 different pieces. I feel like what you were asking was like criminal legal system, right? Like how do we support our people so that we don't end up in the space where this is even necessary in the criminal legal space? And I think part of that is having these practices and moving in community early. That's me saying to my child, did you hear what that person said to you, right? Did you go and say to them, like, I'm sorry, and what does that mean, and how do I make this right? You know, I've been in spaces with our child, he's 5, before where someone has hit him. And I said, okay, like, I've told you to have soft hands before, now I need you to take a 3-minute timeout. And he came to me and said, I don't want him to be in timeout. I want him to have another chance, and I want him to play with me. Like, that's what I really want. And so pausing even to ask my 5-year-old, okay, so what is it that you want after you were hit, right? Like, I live in this space, and still, because of what we've been taught as a society, I automatically lean into the space of, oh, you hit them, you need to go take a time out, right? You need to incarcerate, you need a moment away from society. Instead of me leaning to my child and saying, what do you need or what do you want in this moment? And I think if we really do practice really intentionally that practice in all of our life, right? With our spouse, with our neighbor, with the person in the grocery store, like with everybody, then that creates a culture shift. And so we don't get to the spot of now we need to have this restorative conversation with regard to this harm, but we're always going to have levels of harm. That's just gonna, I mean, we're always gonna misstep, right? We're human, we get stuck in our head. I woke up this morning, I was late, I was running, and then being able to pause and somebody saying, you know what, I just need to give them grace today because I know they cut me off, but they must be late for something. Let me slow down and let them over, come on, right? And let us just move in our community with more grace.
That part right there. You know, that we're all collective, that we are a village, that we are connected. You know, that we care about our neighbor. That we're not so focused on if this person is taking advantage of it, or do they deserve it, or what did they do not to have it, and what should they be doing different. And the reason why I was talking about the hierarchy of harm earlier is because when we focus so much on these individuals that are on the lower level, we think that we don't provide support to those individuals down there, that violence is just going to stay down there. And it does not. We are all connected. If you do not provide the adequate resources and in those communities, it's going to spill out, and violence is going to spill out all over. And we have got to, when we start looking at ourselves as one collective, as one human body, as one human community, that I care how you ate, that I care if you've been, you know, where you live at, then we can get to a point where we're not having these conversations in a criminal justice space. It's interesting that you say that, because I do, since I went through that with, you know, the young man that killed my son, I take that approach with everything. You know, I always look at it, I was like, well, I gave him grace, so I definitely can give the person that cut me off grace. I mean, you took my child, so you just took my place in line. I can definitely, give you grace. So I think that's the main part, is that we have to start to look at each other as connected.
Yeah. If somebody else has a question, I have one more.
There's a woman behind you that has a question.
Hi, I would like to know, have you seen where restorative practices have contributed to self-accountability, and what does that look like? Because it's hard for me, just as a law-abiding adult, if I do something wrong to somebody, I don't see where blaming somebody else is necessary at that point. So how do these restorative practices contribute to self-accountability? What does that look like exactly?
We had a case one time of a 17-year-old involved in a car theft, and they were one of several young people involved in stealing this person's car. And this young person was having a very difficult time in the process of getting to the place of wanting to account for what they did, or the part they played in that. And we continued to work with them. They had a job they were working. They worked the overnight shift, and we had a meeting scheduled with them at a Waffle House when they got off of work. Very early one morning, we drove all the way to Murfreesboro. And we sat with this young person, and we were continuing conversations around what responsibility for repair looks like and what accountability looks like, what it means to account. And they began to kind of looked up over the pancakes and they were crying. They begun to tear up, and we sort of paused and grew silent. Ashlee and I were working this case together and let the space breathe for a second. And Ashlee asked, "Can you talk about what you're feeling?" And they swallowed and said with a quivering voice, "Why should I care what happened to them when no one gave a fuck about me when I was getting beat up every day at school?" That's the quote. That's what she said. And it suddenly dawned that it was difficult for her to move into a space of being able to account for harm that she had caused because she had a barrier of unaccounted for harm that had happened to her. And so the shift in our conversation moved to addressing the harm that she had experienced. And that became the pathway by which she ultimately says, when she gets into her conference with the person whose car she had participated in stealing, they're there sitting together, and she ultimately agrees she's gonna pay this lady back $1,000 that she was out as a part of this process, having to get her car out the impound lot and so forth. And during COVID, she got a job, and she paid $100 a month for 10 straight months to make this right. This is what they had agreed to. The point being that herself being able to get to that space of accountability went through the door of addressing the harm that she herself had experienced, and that this process facilitated that. It created the space, the opportunity for her to, in her tears over pancakes, name her barrier, name what was happening inside of her, naming what she was really struggling with. It was tough for her to emotionally, empathetically, amygdala, hippocampus, connect with the harm that she had caused, because she was battling with the harm that she had experienced and nobody cared. So why should she care? And once someone cared, come back to social support, once she saw that somebody cared, she then was able to open up and find a place to where it now was meaningful to her to care. Those are the kinds of opportunities and options that people need. Whether you caused harm or you've been harmed, you need space to be able to do that. And I think restorative justice processes gives us those opportunities.
Any more questions?
I was curious if you know, a few years ago through an organization I was involved with, Lorraine Stallworth was doing restorative practice work in the schools. Is that continued? I got the impression that it hasn't, and I'm just curious.
I think it has.
Oh, good.
I know Lorraine has retired since then, but I believe that is an effort of MNPS to continue its restorative practices in school. That is a completely different animal. Our school administrators and faculty and teachers have so much to do, and unless your school is completely wired to be a restorative space, not just whole restorative moments, it is very difficult to integrate that. And I think that's the challenge that MNPS is having. How do we integrate restorative practices as something other than a disciplinary response? And that's the challenge, something other than a disciplinary response. How do we make it an ethos without taking the time to make it an ethos, which is trying to walk and not walk at the same time. but I'm cheering MMPS on. Great courage to Dr. Battle and her team in that space.
Okay, is that the last of the questions? Okay, well, I was going to ask you guys to give me a real-life example of restorative justice, but I think I got quite a few through these questions here. So thank you again for coming and sharing you guys' stories. Thanks for being transparent and vulnerable with us, because it's going to take all of us, to make this system work. And thank you guys for doing the groundwork, doing the hard part, and hopefully 10 years from now, restorative justice will be something common, and we won't have to have conferences about it because people already know. But thank you guys.
10 months from now.
There we go. But thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Jasmine, for leading such a wonderful conversation. Please give her a round of applause. So I'm sitting here just kind of humbled. I've got your 5 points, Travis. And I'm feeling very grateful that you all created a support system and a community where we could sit with really hard information, where we could sit and witness the courage of people who would open up and tell stories about the worst day of their life. We thank you for creating that community. I'm not sure anybody in here has the ability to speak to economic security for self or others, so we'll skip over that one. We do want to also name that this process of restorative work, whether it's in the shadow of the criminal legal system, or in the K-12 environment, or maybe even the challenge is just in our daily life about how we think about how we name, frame, refrain from blaming, right? So we got the health here. The housing, on one level, no, we can't touch that, but your number 1 is almost like your number 5. If a safe community, if this is a house for a spirit that's moving through a community that's trying to think, then we get to the number 2 that you mentioned, and I think that's where we started tonight and where we'll end it. The access to high quality education. You have provided that to us, and we are grateful. That said, I'm going to end with my professor hat on, and also the activist hat. I heard several calls to action to press on those who would seek election, right? Last week, okay, students, you know who you are, I'm not gonna look at you. We heard Dr. Jamar Tisby talk about ARC, awareness, relationship, and commitment. So there was the awareness component. We're just beginning to be aware of what constitutes restorative practice in this conversation. And then the last piece is I heard a vision. I don't know about you all. Did you catch it? There was a vision that every case that comes into the criminal system would offer an option. That says to me that there might be a capacity problem. If your wish and your vision comes true, we're going to need a whole lot of restorative practice practitioners.
That's right.
And since we're in class right now, since we're in class right now, I'm going to lead with 2 quick questions. Just give me quick answers. Y'all can look it up, pull out your phone so you can start Googling. 1, for the awareness, for those of us who aren't taking this course for credit, what should people be reading? Who should we be listening to? Who has a great TED Talk or a video? How do people deepen their awareness about process? And then the second, is like unto it, if I'm sitting here about to ace this course, amen, what if I want to follow in your footsteps and do the work that you do? What does that path look like? Just quickly, if you will, give us a couple of nuggets there, and then we'll wrap it up.
Of course, we got Danielle Sered, Until We Reckon.
That's it. Read that. Danielle Sered, Until We Reckon.
Spell that, please.
Daniellesered is her last name. Until We Reckon.
There's a gentleman that was a prosecutor that did a TED Talk called Use Your Shield. The shield, talk about the shield of privilege and how you use that even in that prosecutor space. I think that's still really important to the conversation.
Anything by Howard Sayer.
We got some scholars on the second row over here on the right, if there's any recommendations.
Oh, we do have scholars second row on the right. How do you train around this? Another vision. Be great if ABC had a course in this.
Really?
Really,
I never thought of that.
you did. You did. We offer training at Raphah Institute. The goal is to keep it grounded in the community so that it's not necessarily something that you got to go 4 years and get a degree in to do it, but that regular people can do it in a faith community or in a neighborhood or at a school. A teacher can do it, right? And so we offer 40 hours of restorative practice training, which you can emerge with the principles of as we see them, as we have experimented with them over the last several years. So we offer that. We don't offer that training on a regular basis, but if that's something that you're interested in, let us know.
We do have internship and volunteer
We
opportunities.
do have
that's what I'm talking
what are the
about.
students at? We have internship opportunities, and guess what? We are having a time, and I don't know that we've ever come to ABC to ask, but here we are. We're having a difficult time getting interns of color into our space. Absolutely. We are looking for you. Come on, get a chance. Rafiah, she was a surrogate on one of our cases. And I don't know if you want to talk about that, but that's a space that
Thank
you
you.
can
Good night,
get
because she's going to kick us out.
No, thank you. That's exactly what we were looking for. How do we move? Because to your point, even though we are in an institution of higher education, we are intentionally in community. That's why we're here. And so your answer alone makes this accessible to the people and keeps it in community. And for that, we thank you. So with that, class dismissed. Please, once again, give them a round of applause, please, for their work. And we invite you back to this space next Friday at 6 p.m. for our 6th and final session, where we will hear from Senator Charlene Oliver, moderated by Jerome Moore, to actually say, if this is a so what, now we think about a civic transformation, now what? What does that look like from the State House and beyond? Thank you so very much. We'll see you next week.